Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice was released in 2016 and was directed by Zack Snyder. It stars Henry Cavill, Ben Affleck, and Jesse Eisenberg, and deals with the aftermath of Man of Steel, as Superman is put on trial for his supposed crimes at the end of that film, all while Batman decides to take the law into his own hands and attempts to eradicate the world of Superman, all while behind the scenes Lex Luthor is pulling all the strings. Guys, when Batman vs. Superman was originally released, I wasn't really looking forward to this film. I had kind of fallen off the Snyder train. I didn't like the direction that this series was going, and ultimately, when I watched the film in theaters, I was rather disappointed. In fact, there was a lot of stuff I didn't like about it, but I never hated it to the extent that a lot of people did. I thought it was meh at best, but then, I saw stuff like the Ultimate Edition, which is the 3-hour cut of this film, and it helped clear up a lot of things with the film, but ultimately it didn't necessarily save the film entirely. So for me, Batman vs. Superman is kind of a mixed bag of a film. There's a lot of things I like in it, and a lot of things that I just don't like that really bog the film down, but I really do not think that it is the travesty that people seem to think it is. But there are its problems, and I'm going to go into those. But first off, I want to go on a tangent of something that I brought up before. I am not going to deal with the fact that, yes, this Superman is far different from the comics. He doesn't act like the Superman we know from the comics. Batman, yeah, I guess he doesn't kill, but he does kill in this movie. All those criticisms are going to throw out the window because they don't matter. Those types of criticisms, to me, are not valid because this is Zack Snyder's interpretation. He has these characters and he's going to play around with them, and he is allowed to do whatever he wants with them. Now, what matters is what he does with these characters good or not? That will be up to everybody else to kind of figure out. As for me, I think sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't really. But anyway, let's get into some of the good stuff that I love about this film. I love the opening of this film. I think the first 10 or 15 minutes of this movie are kind of perfect. Like, they sum up something that has been done to death, and then they also talk a little bit about, the events of the previous film in a new and unique way. I really like the beginning of this film where we see the death of Jonathan and Martha Wayne. It's something that has been done to death. We've seen it a lot of times already, but there's something about this portrayal in particular that really feels different. It's something we've seen before, but it feels new again, and it's definitely with the shot composition, the look of the shots, the feeling, the music, everything going on in this little thing. It feels like it's straight out of a comic book, and it's beautiful to watch, and I love that stuff. And I also love the part where Bruce Wayne is running through Metropolis. Basically, it's a 9/11 scene. We're seeing the events of the finale of Man of Steel from his perspective, and it perfectly sets up the conflict of the film, which is Batman versus Superman. We see right then and there why Batman doesn't like Superman, and it's really well done, I think. Also, something that I think is really well done and a lot of people talk about is obviously Ben Affleck as the role of Bruce Wayne and Batman. This is just a really cool performance from him. I mean, I wasn't expecting anything super spectacular, but he was definitely my favorite part of this film. He's got this grizzled quality to him, this, world weary feeling, and there's parts where, you're like, Batman is really, really insane. But he really fills in this role as the Batman perfectly, I think. I think he's a really good Bruce Wayne, and I think he's an even better Batman. I love the fact that we get to see a live action interpretation of the Dark Knight Returns Batman suit. That was really, really cool to see. I also think that a lot of the side characters are really good in this. I love Lois Lane. Amy Adams as Lois Lane is a lot of fun. I love seeing Laurence Fishburne. He's great and stuff like that. But there's little minor little roles throughout this film that I genuinely really enjoy seeing some of these performances. There's also a lot of scenes throughout this film that are genuinely really good. I like the scene of Superman when he just doesn't know what to do and he goes up into the Arctic and, he has a conversation with his father. It's really nice, sweet, and simple, and I think it's kind of effective. I also really like the fight scenes in particular, especially that warehouse scene with Batman. Yes, it's extremely violent. Batman definitely kills a couple people, but it's just filmed really well. And that's another positive that I want to say about this film is that the cinematography is so much better in this film. One of my biggest complaints of Man of Steel was the gray look of everything and also the shaky cam. A lot of the shaky cam in this film is completely gone. I think Zack Snyder got the cinematographer that did Watchmen, and so the film just looks a lot better and the colors are a lot better. It is still, desaturated and everything, but it's not that stark, cold, kind of gray-blue that the first film was. It's definitely a lot better and more pleasant to look at. Also, something else that I want to mention that I absolutely love is that scene in the Batcave where Batman looks at Robin's suit, where it has, Joker spray painted, haha, jokes on you, Batman, and that scene is so good. It's a single shot, just a few frames, and it tells a story without saying anything, and it's really well done. I also think that the film juggles with some interesting ideas, such as, does the world need a Superman? And it kind of asks some interesting questions. There's some great themes here about, mythology and everything, and I think you can clearly tell through the script that Chris Terrio did his research and everything, but I think the problem here is that they're just not explored well enough, and I don't think Zack Snyder is really the person that should be dealing with these themes, because everything I've seen from Zack Snyder just shows me that he doesn't know how to balance theme throughout anything he's really done before. And so I think that's where I'm going to get into a lot of my negatives. And one of my biggest problems with this film is how shallow and empty it feels. It has a lot of good themes in it, but again, Zack Snyder just doesn't know how to balance these themes in an effective way. It's just not something he's good at. He just kind of puts it in there and doesn't really explore it that much. He just kind of tells you, and then that's about it. And it makes his films seem deep, but they're really honestly kind of shallow. I also think Henry Cavill, there was a real disservice to him in both these films. It's just, he's so bland and directed so blandly that, I can't really get an impression of him if he's good or not, and that's kind of disappointing for me. I also think that the movie is just juggling too much. The movie is 3 hours, and yet it still feels extremely overcrowded with a lot of things going on. In fact, when watching it, it reminded me of the first act of Man of Steel, where they set up a lot of stuff on Krypton, way too much, and that's basically this film to, a 3-hour length. But honestly, to me personally, the worst thing in this movie, it's the only thing that I think is genuinely just terrible, is Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. And I'm not going to go on and be like, oh, he's not like the Lex Luthor from the comics. No, that doesn't matter. That's not a complaint. What matters is the performance itself, and I think this is just a really miscalculated performance, just from the casting to the performance itself. It's weird, it's awkward, and it feels ad-libbed a lot of times. There's just little quirks that he does, and every time I watch it, I'm really embarrassed. Like, I think that's sort of what Zack Snyder was going for, because there's moments where I feel like, oh, okay, he was definitely trying to do this and make him weird and awkward, but other times it just doesn't work and it falls flat, especially when he's saying all this dialogue that for the most part is pretty good and cool sounding dialogue, but it just doesn't sound good coming from Jesse Eisenberg giving this really bizarre performance. This is definitely, in my opinion, the worst aspect of this film. And it's the one thing that the ultimate edition of this film does not, save. You cannot save this bizarre miscalculation of a performance, but you can save a lot of the other things. And I will go into the fact that the Ultimate Edition is far superior to the theatrical cut. A lot of problems with the theatrical cut was that they cut out context scenes that you needed to understand the story completely. I mean, I remember when Jesse Eisenberg, Lex Luthor, was talking about he's coming for us everything at the very end of the film, and you didn't get that scene in the theatrical cut. They had to release a Steppenwolf scene on YouTube for that scene to make sense, and the film, the theatrical cut in particular, just felt so choppy because of that. There was a lot of context that was taken out that is added back in with the Ultimate Edition. So I would definitely say, if you're going to watch this film at all, watch the Ultimate Edition of this film. It's far superior. It makes a whole lot more sense. There's still some problems along the way, but it is a better cut. But ultimately, too, what stopped me from at least thinking this movie was okay was the fact that even though there were some great scenes that I genuinely loved, the problem was that there was a lot of time in between each of those moments that I was just really disinterested with what I was watching. I was kind of bored through a lot of this film, where there's just not a lot happening, and what is happening just isn't that engaging. It's kind of boring at times. I also feel like they go a little too hard with the religious allegory and stuff like that, because they did it in stuff like Superman Returns before, and it's kind of jarring at times, and it was really jarring in Man of Steel. But I think it worked for that moment in particular. But here, it's a little too much. I mean, when you have Superman being wrapped up in his cape and looking as if he's being taken off the cross, and then in the background you see some telephone poles that, are in the shape of 3 crosses, I think you're dealing a little too much with religious allegory and everything, and it just really took me out and just made me groan. Also, I think ultimately this film is missing an emotional core that the first film, Man of Steel, did have. Man of Steel wasn't perfect, but it felt so genuine at times, trying to tell this really emotional story. Whether it worked or not is up to you, but I definitely feel there was more heart in Man of Steel than there is in Batman vs. Superman. But overall, guys, Batman vs. Superman, I don't think is a complete disaster. The Ultimate Edition is a lot better than the theatrical cut, but I think it has some solid performances in it, some not so solid performances, but there's a lot of interesting ideas here that could have been developed a lot more if it was in the hands of a more capable director. There's things in this that I genuinely love. I love the nightmare scene, even though it's bizarre and it feels so out of place. But there's just a lot here that I love, and a lot here that I don't, which makes this film ultimately one of the biggest mixed bags I've ever seen. And after I finished my viewing, I was messaging one of my friends, and I told them my opinion of it, and he literally summed up how this film is. It's not overwhelming, and it's not underwhelming. My opinion was just whelming. So anyway, guys, with all that said, I'm going to give Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice a 5 out of 10. Well, guys, I want to thank you for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next review.